Learning, of course, that grants from the NIH to study how MERS, which has a 40% mortality rate, obviously much more deadly than COVID, could evolve to better infect humans. And that research is currently being done at UNC and names animal models of human disease as critical reagents for therapeutics and vaccine testing.
We know that UNC had been studying coronaviruses before the pandemic actually began. ProPublica reports that at least 6 researchers were required to undergo medical monitoring following 4 incidents where they were potentially exposed to what the NIH now confirms were tubes of lab-created coronaviruses.
Right. So it just seems so, worrying, or at least something the public has the right to know a lot more about if there was this critical early, this isn't even an if, there was a critical early period where relevant scientists thought that a lab leak was as likely a cause as not of the origin, and then to go from that to you can't even talk about that without being run off social media, condemned for having spread conspiracy theories in the media. Ryan, what do you think about? And then but this research is still being done elsewhere in other contexts.
And that to me is the most critical question here. Accountability for the millions of people that were killed and the many more that were going to be killed through this pandemic obviously is important. But we don't want to, in a few years or a few decades, look back at COVID and say that was the gentle pandemic. Like we want to take a very close look at how this pandemic started, so that we can write rules around what type of research is worth conducting scientifically and what type of research is simply too risky. And we had either last week or the week before on Rising, we had a debate between two biologists over this very question. And I went into it pretty skeptical of gain of function research and came out of that interview just frightened. And that was from hearing the absolute best case from one of the most well-respected researchers who's making the argument on behalf of continuing to do this research. And so even if it's only possible that it came out of this lab and was a result of this research, that's extremely important to understand because it has implications for what policy can be set. And it also helps to explain some of the ferocity around this question and why you're hearing so vociferously and so angrily and in such an unhinged way from so many researchers and scientists who are flatly dismissing the possibility that it may have come out of the lab, because there is money and careers are at stake here. They are very much aware that the NIH through Dr. Anthony Fauci is very supportive of gain of function research and wants gain of function research to continue. There are people within the NIH who do not, but Dr. Fauci is on record saying that it is, the cost benefit analysis is clear that this is important stuff to be done. And so not only are these scientists, getting in the good graces of basically the sole grant maker in this field, but they're also defending their entire livelihood, the thing that they do. And I just don't think that somebody or a field as conflicted as that should be the one making this decision for the entire world.
I don't know if we have any working theories as to why they would cover it up, but I wonder, I know for me, I said I was someone that disregarded the theory the moment I heard it. It was less about what the theory was, and it was more about who were spouting the theory and the rhetoric around it. I know in the earlier days of the pandemic, there was a lot of xenophobia, and so I felt like, this was something being used to foster more hate towards Chinese people and Asian people, so that was the reason I dismissed it. So I'm wondering if there's something to that, to people not wanting to have the discussion, and even maybe the scientists not wanting that to be the narrative, why it would come out and then days later they would change it because of the way we went about discussing it. What are your thoughts?
Let me make one point on that and then go to Emily. Yes. So what's in two things? Yes, anything that Trump says, the liberals, progressives, the left, myself included, were very quickly be like, well, that's probably nonsense. But some, blind squirrel finds a nut sometimes. So that's one point. Second point would be Chinese scientists were the first ones to start floating the possibility that it may have leaked out of the the Wuhan lab. So they obviously are not xenophobic, and many Chinese scientists still believe that this is the case. So you can believe this without having some hostility to China or Chinese people. But
absolutely.
Emily, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely, Ryan. I think for sure. I don't think any belief in what seems to be, a credible theory at this point, especially, right? 80-20, you said earlier, is pretty startling.
Honestly, if you had hostility toward Asian people, you would put this on uniquely specific to China cultural practices, like what goes on at wet markets. That to me actually seems like the more xenophobic explanation than research funded and conducted, supported by U.S. by white Western colonizing medicine
I don't
people.
necessarily disagree.
Is what caused it. And the Chinese government is the lab.
I don't disagree. I don't think inherently discussing it or who's bringing it up is the problem. I think it might have just been in the initial days what it was being packaged and couched with.
Well, Emily, we'll leave you with the last word. What is the next step in trying to unravel this puzzle and understand, because that's what we just want to understand. Fine, if it was not a lab leak, fine. I have questions about this research, even if it's not a lab leak. I'm very skeptical of this research. We just really want to know the truth, and we want our scientists to be pursuing whatever the truth is, regardless. But we have a lot of concerns about the institutional need to kind of defend what's been going on and say that there's no way that could have caused these circumstances. So what is the next thing that your organization, that journalists should be doing to understand the picture a little more clearly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so just on the point about how this was couched at first, I think it's important to keep in mind that an investigation into how this pandemic started doesn't negate the need to also investigate what went wrong with the U.S. response. I think that's also critically important. But just as far as next steps, I think U.S. Right to Know has some good leads. I think one of the strongest might be, we know that NIH deleted some genetic sequences from its public-facing repository at the behest of scientists in China. And some scientists are curious, could there be other sequences that were deleted from the public-facing database that could help fill out the phylogenetic tree as to how this virus evolved and from where it evolved and whether it's natural or not. And we know that there are a lot of Republicans in Congress who are interested in digging into this and who are following our investigation really closely and are going to see, hey, these 6 pages of notes from this teleconference or summary of these teleconferences could be important. Let's subpoena those and find out what was going on. So if we see either the House or the Senate flip to Republican control, that could be another investigation that could shed more light on this.
Well, Emily,
let me do a real quick
Go
plug
ahead.
for anybody who's kind of new to this and skeptical of it. Allow me, this would be a good one for you. About a month ago, I did a podcast episode on my Intercept podcast called Deconstructed. It's about an hour long, with 3 of the journalists who've been doing great. Emily has done terrific work on this. I had a couple of Intercept journalists and another author on there who talk about how this unfolded from start to finish, and in a way that I think is pretty digestible for people. So you could just find it in the feed from about a month ago.
Beautiful. I'm gonna check that out. Ryan, and I encourage everybody else to check it out too.